The year 1942 marked a critical turning point in World War II. After years of rapid territorial gains, Adolf Hitler and the German army had turned their attention to the Soviet Union. The primary objective was to capture the industrial city of Stalingrad, a vital link in the Soviet transport network. At the same time, the capture of the city would cripple Soviet morale and pave the way for an invasion into the Caucasus, home to vital oil reserves. The battle for Stalingrad was not just about military strategy, it was symbolic. Hitler had ordered that the city bearing the name of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin be captured at all costs. This was about national pride, ideology, and sending a message to the Soviet people. The Nazis were unstoppable. However, the Soviets were determined to defend their city at all costs. Stalingrad represented not only a military target, but also the heart of the Soviet resistance. With the city's importance growing day by day, the stage was set for one of the most brutal battles in history. Stalingrad was located along the Volga River, a major transportation route for the Soviet Union. If the Germans could capture it, they would not only disrupt the Soviet supply lines, but also sever vital connections between the east and west of the country. This would drastically weaken Soviet military efforts and further isolate key regions from Moscow's control. Moreover, Stalingrad was a critical industrial hub, producing a wide array of military equipment and supplies for the Soviet war effort. Its fall would diminish Soviet resources and significantly hinder the production of war materials. For the Nazis, it wasn't just about taking another city, it was about crippling the very foundation of the Soviet industrial machine. In addition to its strategic value, the capture of Stalingrad held immense propaganda power. It was a direct attack on Soviet pride, named after their leader, Stalin. The city had to fall for the Nazis to prove their strength, and for the Soviet people to feel the impact of their leadership's failure. From the moment the Germans set their sights on Stalingrad, the Soviet leadership made it clear they would not surrender. The city's defense was led by General Vasily Chuikov, who adopted a strategy of fierce resistance and urban warfare. The Soviets fortified the city and transformed it into a fortress, knowing that every inch of land would be contested with blood. Soviet soldiers dug in, prepared for a long siege. They understood the stakes. The loss of Stalingrad would be a devastating blow to Soviet morale, and the victory of the Germans would mean an unstoppable march eastward. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, the Soviet forces turned Stalingrad into a symbol of resistance, vowing to fight for the city to the last man. As the battle raged on, civilians also played a critical role. They worked in factories to produce weapons, carried supplies to the front lines, and even took up arms to defend their homes. Stalingrad became a battle for survival, not just for the military, but for the very existence of the Soviet state. The fight for Stalingrad was not fought in open fields or expansive battlefronts. Instead, it was a brutal urban struggle, where every building, every street, and every corner became a battleground. The Germans quickly realized that capturing Stalingrad would not be as easy as they had anticipated. The city's terrain, rubble-filled streets and ruins, favored the defenders, allowing them to engage in ambushes and surprise attacks. Both sides used every tactic available in urban warfare. The Germans attempted to use artillery, tanks, and airstrikes to break the Soviet defenses. But the close quarters made it difficult to advance without facing heavy resistance. The Soviets, in turn, used guerrilla tactics, using the city's ruins for cover and making it nearly impossible for the Germans to secure any lasting position. The fighting in Stalingrad was ruthless. Soldiers from both sides were forced to fight in conditions that were both physically and mentally exhausting. The urban environment, with its constant bombardments and sniper fire, contributed to a sense of claustrophobia and terror. Stalingrad became a place where the human spirit was tested to its limits. By November 1942, the Germans had overextended their forces. While they had initially succeeded in capturing parts of Stalingrad, the Soviet command had been planning a massive counteroffensive. The operation, known as Uranus, began with a series of coordinated strikes aimed at encircling the German Sixth Army. The success of Uranus was unexpected. The Soviets managed to encircle the Germans, trapping them in Stalingrad and cutting off their supply lines. The German forces were now completely isolated, and their only option was to fight for survival. What had once been a German offensive now became a desperate battle to escape a Soviet encirclement. The German army's overconfidence, lack of preparation, and underestimation of Soviet strength were their downfall. As winter set in, conditions in Stalingrad grew worse, and the Germans found themselves unable to break free of the encirclement. The German forces trapped in Stalingrad quickly faced unimaginable hardships. With their supply lines cut off, they were forced to rely on dwindling resources. Food and medical supplies were scarce, and the freezing winter made conditions even worse. Soldiers battled not only Soviet forces, but also starvation, frostbite, and disease. The Luftwaffe attempted to airlift supplies to the German troops, but the Soviet air blockade and constant Soviet ground attacks made it nearly impossible to sustain the German forces. Morale plummeted as soldiers suffered from hunger, cold, and the constant fear of Soviet attacks. Starvation and cold became the silent enemies of the German Sixth Army. With each passing day, more soldiers succumbed to the brutal conditions. The Luftwaffe's efforts to supply the trapped forces were futile, and the Germans had no choice but to accept their defeat. By January 1943, the situation for the German Sixth Army had become untenable. General Friedrich Paulus, the commander of the Sixth Army, refused to break his orders to fight to the last man, but the collapse was inevitable. Starvation, freezing temperatures, and constant Soviet attacks led to the eventual surrender of Paulus and his remaining forces. On February 2, 1943, General Paulus formally surrendered to the Soviet forces. The Germans lost over 300,000 soldiers, including many of their most experienced troops. The defeat was catastrophic and marked the first major German defeat of the war. The surrender of the German Sixth Army was a stunning blow to Hitler's campaign in the East. It marked the beginning of a shift in the war's momentum, with the Soviet Union starting to push the German forces back. The defeat at Stalingrad had profound consequences. It was a turning point in World War II, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The German army was now on the defensive, and the Soviet Union began a relentless push westward that would eventually lead to the fall of Berlin in 1945. Stalingrad was not only a military defeat for the Germans, but also a psychological blow. The once mighty Nazi war machine had been halted, and the myth of German invincibility was shattered. For the Soviet Union, it was a resounding victory that boosted morale and proved the strength of their resistance. The battle for Stalingrad became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. It was a testament to the resilience of both the Soviet people and their soldiers, who fought against overwhelming odds to defend their homeland. When the guns finally fell silent in February 1943, Stalingrad was nothing more than a shattered wasteland. Corpses littered the frozen streets, the ruins groaned under the weight of devastation, and not a single building stood untouched. Survivors, both soldiers and civilians, wandered like ghosts through the rubble, searching for shelter, food, and lost loved ones. The battle had consumed the city, leaving behind only the hollow echoes of unimaginable suffering. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a symbol of resilience and sacrifice, celebrated in propaganda as the turning point of the Great Patriotic War. For Germany, it was a scar, the moment when the dream of victory was shattered irreparably. Hitler refused to accept the reality, but inside every German soldier's heart, Stalingrad was the beginning of the end. The world would never forget the price paid in the ruins of this once thriving city.